Yes, guys, welcome back to the MMA Soccer Podcast. As always, I'm Fraser Crone, and let's talk UFC Shanghai. And there was a couple of talking points from the event. First, I just want to say that my camera and my audio have been playing up all day, so the video might not be as crisp, the audio might not be as crisp as we're used to. But we get the content out, and I'll address that before my next podcast. I have got a video. Not a podcast, just a YouTube video up on the MMA Soccer website at the moment, looking at why Bellator fighters are struggling so much in the UFC. So I'll link that one down below. Be sure to go and check that out because it's a really interesting video. And of course, I've still got my UFC 319 review up on the website as well. But this morning with my breakfast, I was watching UFC Shanghai. With it being in China, the time difference was all over the place for some people, and I thought it was, on the whole, a really good event. The main event was interesting. The co-main event, I think, was more interesting in the lead up to it than it was the actual fight itself. We had the heavyweight fight, the flyweight fight, the controversial welterweight fight I'm going to touch on, and then we had some really good performances up and down the card. So I'm going to touch on the sort of highlights for myself, the talking points coming out of the event, and we'll play a little bit of what's next for a few of the fighters that are on the card. But main event saw Johnny Walker come from behind, and he was fairly far behind in my opinion, to beat Zhang Mingyang by second round TKO. This was a fight of two halves. The first half of the fight, the first round, Zhang really was landing the big power shots, was hurting Johnny Walker, was kind of backing Walker up. It seemed that he was, every time he wanted to land against Johnny Walker, he could, and he was. Johnny Walker did the strange kind of almost fake glove touch to immediate takedown attempt. I didn't get that, and I thought it was a bad strategy from Johnny Walker. But Johnny Walker's going to Johnny Walker. It is what it is. But we saw early Johnny Walker investing in the leg kicks. First round, he landed 7 of 18, and then the second round, the leg kicks really came to pass, and he landed 8 of 8. I thought in the first round, Zhang did some really good work. He's a first round finishing machine. All of his UFC fights so far, including the one on the road to the UFC, finished in the first round. I think, if I'm right in thinking, let me just double check, because I'm pretty sure that, yeah, he's got 19 wins, 13 knockouts, 6 submissions. I'm pretty sure he's only seen a second round once. Right, according to his Tapology, he's seen a second round twice. In his first professional fight, he got submitted in the second round, and then he saw a second round. Where did I see it? In 2018, but since then, whether he's been finished or he's finished people, it's all been in the first round. So entering the second round is not something that Zhang is used to. Johnny Walker's seen 5-round fights. He went the distance with Thiago Santos. He went the distance with Nikita Krylov over 3 rounds. He went the distance with Anthony Smith over 3 rounds. He went more than just a single round with Magomed Ankalaev in that second fight of theirs. So he's used to finishing people, but he's also used to seeing out more than just a first round. And I think, Bisping spoke about it a little bit on the broadcast, in that when Zhang hadn't finished Johnny Walker in that first round, it's not that he was gassed out by any stretch of the imagination, but there's got to be that little doubt in his mind. He landed some big shots, the elbows in particular, really, really good elbows landed by Zhang Mingyang in that first round. And he didn't get Johnny Walker out of there. Second round starts, much of the same, to be honest. It was a very sort of rinse and repeat. But then the leg kicks really started to take their toll on Zhang. And I love a good leg kick. I really, really do. I think there's nothing greater than... It's still a relatively new and underused, in my opinion, facet of MMA. And Johnny Walker was attacking the very low leg, the calf of Zhang, and it paid. The 3 leg kick. Well, he landed 8 leg kicks, but the 3 final leg kicks of Johnny Walker that Johnny Walker landed, did all the damage to Zhang. All the damage, he really did. And that's what led to the finish. You know, Zhang fell to his back, collapsed to his back, and Johnny Walker got the TKO victory. What's next for Johnny Walker? What's next for Zhang? I don't think Zhang takes a massive step back. You know, this was his first main event in his fourth UFC fight. He's still 20. He's 27 years old. He's still going to hit hard. You know, power's the last thing to go, and he's nowhere near gone. He's not even. He's potentially 5 years off his peak. So Zhang is definitely going to be up and around the title picture at some point in his career. As for Johnny Walker, I think we're sort of we're in the realm of fun fights for Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker's never going to be a world champion. We know that. Let's be honest. On Tapology rankings have got Johnny Walker. Let me just see. They've got him ranked number 9. I think that's being quite kind to Johnny Walker, to say the least. But credit to where it's due. Johnny Walker gets back in the win column. Who does he fight next, though? Does he fight up the division? There's a chance that he fights up the division, which is a crazy thing to say for Johnny Walker, who could be seeing himself against, you know, we've had the main event between Johnny Walker and Jamahal Hill. That could be another rematch main event, you know, two men at the different ends of their career. Johnny Walker potentially back on the rise. Jamahal Hill, you know, lost 3 straight. Alex Pereira, Jiri Pachka, and then Khalil Roundtree by decision last time out. We'll see what the future holds for Johnny Walker, but it's an exciting time. For Zhang, I don't think Zhang really drops down too much. He's ranked number 18 in the Tapology rankings. He was ranked, I think, number 15 going in on the official... number 14 on the official UFC rankings. I don't think he loses an awful lot of ground. I don't think he has to be sort of fighting very far down the division. There's definitely fights out there for him. I think someone like an Iron Kutalaba makes a lot of sense, although Kutalaba's not really close to the ranking, so whether that does make sense. Alonzo Menafield, perhaps, you know, he's a well-respected guy in the division. Philip Linds, Dustin Jacoby. These are all fights that make sense for Zhang. I don't think Zhang takes a massive step back in this one as far as rankings are concerned. It was, he put in a really good performance. I think he obviously has to address the susceptibility to the low leg kick, because that's something opponents are going to look to use against him now. But I thought overall it was just a really good performance by Johnny Walker. You know, he weathered the storm and he it paid dividends back in the win column. The finish came as a result of the leg kicks. You know, he did TKO him through strikes, but I think if he would have let him stand up, he would have continued to land those leg kicks and it would have been over for TKO for leg kicks. But it's a good finish for Johnny Walker, back in the win column, as I say, and a performance of the night bonus, not too bad. Now, the co-main event, Aljamain Sterling versus Brian Ortega at a catch weight of 153 pounds. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this, and I might release a video later this week on the career of Brian Ortega, because I'll be honest, I used to like watching Brian Ortega fight. I really thought that he would cause Max Holloway a lot of problems when they fought. I also thought that he'd cause Volkanovski a lot of problems when they fought. And although, you know, he had his moment against Volkanovski, he was comprehensively outbeaten in those two fights. I used to really look forward to Brian Ortega fights. Now, I just simply put, I'm annoyed. I'm frustrated with Brian Ortega, because this is a guy who, in my opinion, is not taking his career that seriously as a UFC fighter. You know, he's 34 now, and how he's held on to a ranking of, so on the featherweight rankings on the UFC website, Brian Ortega is number 5. He was number 4 this time last week. On the Tapology rankings, let me just double check where he is. He's a more realistic, even 8th, and I think that is a generous 8th. Brian Ortega, since losing to Max Holloway, is 2-5, including that Max Holloway loss. That includes lackluster performances throughout, in my opinion. The performance against Aljamain Sterling, to not only have Aljamain Sterling fly out to China, but then to be potentially, well, I thought the fight was off. I woke up one morning last week, I think it was Thursday morning, I thought the fight was off, or Friday morning, I thought the fight was off. Ortega hospitalised. Then they compromise and make a catchweight fight. He looked dreadful yesterday on the scales, and at the face off at the ceremonial sort of weigh-ins, he looked dreadful. He made the former bantamweight. Let's not forget, a mere few fights ago, Aljamain Sterling only made his featherweight debut in April of 2024. So we're talking, what, year and a half? He's been a featherweight, and yes, he was always a big bantamweight, but facts are facts. He used to be a bantamweight. He used to be the bantamweight champion. He's only had 3 fights at featherweight. To make the former bantamweight, and yeah, again, facts are facts, former bantamweight champion, but to make the former bantamweight, who's technically, he is still going up in weight. He is a career bantamweight. He's gone up to featherweight. To make him then go up almost another whole weight class to 153 pounds, I thought was disgusting from Brian Ortega. And that's not a botched weight cut. That's not a botched weight cut. Is you start cutting the water weight a little bit too late. You may be weighing for 145 or 146 pound fight. You weigh in at 148. You're overweight. 147, 148. Even a botched weight cut could be 149. To know the day before weigh-ins you're not even going to make 140. You're not even going to miss weight by a little bit. You're asking essentially for the fight. Let's be honest, the fight to be moved up a whole new weight class to lightweight. I thought was shocking from Brian Ortega. And then to go in there, and fair play to Aljamain Sterling, I think he was backed into a bit of a corner. It's either you accept the fight at lightweight or the fight's cancelled. You've flown all the way out to China, you've done your camp. It's this or nothing. And fair play to Aljamain Sterling, because he still took the fight. He was well within his rights to say, no, I don't want to take the fight at lightweight. I'm giving him the advantage then. But then to go in there as Brian Ortega and land 2 strikes in the first round, 9 strikes in the second round, and then increase your input a little bit throughout the final few rounds, I thought was just showing a real disrespect to the sport, showing a disrespect to Aljamain Sterling, showing a disrespect to all the fans that had flown out to see him potentially. Fans in the arena. This was a 5-round main event. And Brian Ortega started off the 5-round co-main event. So they're being given a huge showcase in this co-main event. Not everyone gets the opportunity to fight across 5 rounds in a non-title fight, not in the main event of a fight night card. Brian Ortega's been given that opportunity, and he put in one of the most lackluster performances. It's like he didn't want to be in there, and that's what it really came across to for me. Because at no point, Aljamain Sterling is difficult, but everyone goes on about Brian Ortega's jiu-jitsu, and he has really, really good jiu-jitsu. But everybody goes on about Brian Ortega's jiu-jitsu and how good it is, and if he gets taken down, Aljamain Sterling's got to be careful. Open up in the fight and look to take down, look to just unload on Aljamain Sterling. What's the worst that can happen? You can get taken down. Well, your jiu-jitsu's phenomenal. Aljamain Sterling, I could not tell you the last time Aljamain Sterling, with respect to Aljo, former champion and whatnot, I couldn't tell you the last time he KO'd someone flat. I don't know if he ever has, to be honest. He TKO'd TJ Dillashaw. Obviously, Dillashaw had the injury in that one. That was a TKO on the floor. I'm looking down Aljo's record now. He TKO'd Hugo Viana in 2014 in his second UFC fight. So Brian Ortega didn't have to be massively, massively worried about Aljamain Sterling on the feet. When you're down 2 rounds, throw the kitchen sink at it. Because if I'm the UFC now, I've got a difficult situation on my hands with Brian Ortega. Like I said, I'm going to probably go into this in a little bit more detail in a video later this week. But if I'm Dana White in the UFC, there's two options for Brian Ortega. There's two options I'm going to force onto Brian Ortega. A forced move up to lightweight is certainly on the cards. Really, really is, because we can't be having this. So that's number one. Number two is cutting Brian Ortega. The UFC this week cut Brian Battle for missing weight in a higher weight class. Admittedly, Brian Battle is not the name of Brian Ortega, but after a performance like he showed against Aljamain Sterling, is anybody really wanting to see Brian Ortega fight again? I'm not. I think Brian Ortega at this point is and I don't like to sort of put this title on people, but he is a stepping stone. He is a gatekeeper to the top 5 of the division. He will and should drop down in the division comprehensively. But I look at people in the lower ends of the division, and I wonder who beats Brian Ortega. I think David Onama beats him at number 13. I think number 14, Dan Ige, has a good crack. Steve Garcia at number 12, I think, has a good crack. Patricio Pitbull, I think, really gives him a tough fight. Jean Silva beats him. Yusuf Zalal beats him. Josh Emmett beats him. Aljamain Sterling beat him. Arnold Allen beats him. And then you're into the upper echelons of the division. Lerone wipes the floor with him. I think Yair Rodriguez, even though Ortega has a win over him, I think Yair Rodriguez, in the form that he's in now, beats him. And Movsar Evloev beats him, because he also, not only did he not sort of go for it through fear of being maybe taken down, I don't know what the reason that he didn't really go for it, but even when he was taken down, Aljo dominated him on the floor. It was 50-45 on all scorecards. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the career of Brian Ortega, like I say, later this week, but if you can't already tell, I'm a little bit disappointed in Brian Ortega. A little bit disappointed. Someone I'm not disappointed in is this man, Charles Johnson. What a performance. Again, like the main event, this was a fight of two halves. Loney Kavanagh dominated that first round. He was hurting Charles Johnson. He was far, far too fast for Charles Johnson. He was catching him with hooks, with lead hooks, with backhand hooks. He was just dominating the fight, even when Charles Johnson tried to take the fight to the ground. Kavanagh was really, really good at defending that and almost sort of taking the back of Charles Johnson. I think it was in the second round. It might have been towards the end of the first, but in the second round, for sure, Loney Kavanagh, when Charles Johnson was going for the takedown, he was threatening the guillotine. So there's an extra thing for Charles Johnson to be thinking about in the back of his mind. Okay, if I don't, if I'm not successful with the takedown, or if I'm a bit lazy with the takedown, I could get submitted here by Kavanagh. And at one point, I think Kavanagh went for the guillotine. Johnson fought out of it, and then Kavanagh again almost pulled guard whilst going for the guillotine. And I think Johnson got out of that one. And I think that Johnson then was a little bit more confident in himself. He had good submission defense. But it was Kavanagh's lack of experience, I think, that got him knocked out in this one. It was a phenomenal knockout. He landed a few shots on Johnson, and Johnson replied with a big right hook of his own, whilst Kavanagh was kind of admiring his work. He didn't get out. He landed the shots. He was admiring his work. And the visual of Kavanagh getting knocked out is going to haunt him, and I think he's going to learn massively from it. I think the next Loney Kavanagh fight, I think he's going to barely be touched. I honestly do, because he retreated from the exchange with his hands. I tweeted it. I said he retreated from the exchange with his hands in his pockets, and that's pretty much the visual that we got. His hands were so far down, and that's what got him knocked out. And that's essentially how Charles Johnson got the win. But Charles Johnson, he knocked out Loney Kavanagh, he knocked out Joshua Van, and he beats Jake Hadley, beat Summer Jarrett. Yes, he lost last time out in what was a fairly close fight, I thought. But he did what he had to do. He said that he felt that he was being put in there against Loney Kavanagh to lose. I mean, Kavanagh at the time was 9-0. I don't think he was put in there to lose. I think the UFC have a lot of respect for Charles Johnson, but Charles Johnson could make a sneaky run at the upper echelons of the division. I'm really excited. I want to see a big fight for Charles Johnson next because I think he deserves it. He's being put in against these young killers all the time, and he is showing that he has enough to beat these young killers, and with, I wouldn't say with ease because some of these fights have been tough. Like I say, he was on his way to losing that fight, but I think, give Charles Johnson a decent fight next, a fairly big fight. Ulanbekov is a potential. Sorry about that. Where was I? Yeah, I think an Ulanbekov fight could make sense for Charles Johnson next. I think a fight against Jose Ochoa, the guy that lost to Ulanbekov last time out, I think that would be a really fun fight as well. Start putting some respect on Charles Johnson's name. As for Kavanagh, Tapology had him ranked number 32 ahead of this fight. Who did he face next? It's a difficult one because I think the UFC will still want to build Kavanagh, and rightfully so. I think, I tweeted out before he lost, he's 26, and I tweeted out before he lost that he'd shown massive improvements in this fight, ironically, before being knocked out. And I thought, I really do think that he showed really good improvements in the fight. It was just, it only takes a second to get knocked out, unfortunately, and he was on the end of a bad one. He'll learn a lot from this knockout, and I think that's what's most important. Other talking points from this fight card. We had Sergey Pavlovich beat Waldo Cortez Acosta. Back-to-back unanimous decision wins for Pavlovich. It's not going to get him a title shot anytime soon, but, in a shallow heavyweight division, it might. I hope it doesn't. I don't think he's deserving of a title fight next. But then again, who does he face? It's a difficult one for Pavlovich. But, it was a decent performance. He was the heavier-handed guy. Waldo Cortez Acosta was busy, but not busy enough, I feel, and I don't think he landed enough, simply put. Kiefer Crosby lost his third straight UFC fight, and for me, this one's a real difficult one. I tweeted ahead of this one, before the fight kicked off, that if Kiefer Crosby lost, so I put a huge fight for Crosby here, with another loss, he'll likely get cut from the promotion. He's had 2 first-round losses, finish losses, obviously, if they're in the first round, but 2 first-round finish losses on the bounce. But he got one of the worst illegal knees I've seen in a long time. 2-point deduction from, I think it was Mark Goddard, and he continued on. Maybe a minute later, he was TKO'd in that fight. I really disagree with... fair play to Kiefer Crosby. Warrior spirit, wanted to continue after that. Huge mouse under his eye, big cut, blood everywhere. But at what point do we take the decision out of the fighter's hands? Because he was in no fit state to continue. He put in a lackluster performance after that. And I'd give him another chance in the UFC. There's a massive asterisk next to that loss. It's an awful foul, and the finish came, a touch later. I think the UFC, unfortunately, won't look after Kiefer Crosby and will likely cut him after his third straight loss. But I disagree with him being cut if he is to be cut. It was a really bad foul. It was a really bad foul, and I don't think the fight should have been. I don't think that was a fair loss for Kiefer Crosby. If he does get another opportunity, he needs to improve his wrestling, his takedown defense, his defensive submission, because he's now he's 0-3, 2 submissions and a TKO. The TKO came as a result of him being taken down. Unfortunately for Kiefer Crosby, if you look at his UFC career, his takedown defense is 0%. He just cannot defend the takedown. He's just not good enough at defending the takedown. So that needs to be addressed massively. Rong Zhu had a really good return to action. I thoroughly enjoyed Rong Zhu's fight with Austin Hubbard. I thought he was the much better guy. I think he landed the heavier shots. I think he was the more active. Takedown defense was really, really good. Something that he'd apparently worked on. And I didn't realise, but he's training with Eugene Behrman, which is cool. And one more talking point, Kyle Daukaus back in the UFC after just shy of a 3-year hiatus. He lost to Roman Dolidze, he lost to Eric Anders. He returned not an easy fight against Michel Pereira. Michel Pereira is a solid competitor. And Kyle Daukaus finishes things in 43 seconds with a massive, massive overhand right. It was a lovely, lovely finish. A little bit of controversy, about the finish, because Michel Pereira popped straight up after the fight was waved off. But those elbows that Kyle Daukaus landed on the floor had him out cold. He was out cold. That's a fact. Really nice to see Kyle Daukaus, who I think he's got a future in the UFC. He didn't have the best of UFC runs, first time round, but you look at some of the guys that he lost to. Brendan Allen, top of the division. Phil Hawes at the time was a solid competitor. He had the no contest with Kevin Holland. Roman Dolidze, top of the division, and Eric Anders is a tough fight for anyone on his day. I hope they matchmake him a little bit, let's say, fairer. Quick check of the middleweight rankings on Tapology. I don't know if Daukaus will even be in them. Kyle Daukaus is not even in the Tapology rankings. I think they're just sort of the UFC Tapology rankings, so they just haven't updated. But there's a good few fights there for him. And I think it is exciting for Kyle Daukaus, who, like I said, I think is one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the good guys of the sport. A little bit of an earlier podcast this week, as I managed to watch the fights live because they were in China and at a decent time for me to watch them all live. I'll try and get a video out this week on Brian Ortega. I don't think there's a UFC this weekend. We'll obviously be looking ahead in a few weeks to UFC Paris. But I will link my video on why Bellator fighters are struggling in the UFC below. Check that out, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you next time.